15, verses 1 through 11. And that is found in the page 174 in the New Testament section of your Pew Bibles. Once while Jesus was standing beside the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he saw two boats there at the shore. The fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little way to the shore. Then he sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked all night long, but have caught nothing. Yet if you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled the boat so that they began to sink. But Simon Peter saw it. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, there, who are their partners with Simon. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching people." When they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. The Lord bless this reading of the gospel. Did you hear Fred at all? Any of you? Did Lamb through the scriptures?
Yeah.
Somebody? No?
The call of the unlikely.
Say it louder.
The call of the unlikely.
Okay.
The call of
the unlikely. Right. Okay.
Somebody who's
There, Isaiah.
sinful to.
Yeah.
To
Right.
to
Right.
see
Okay.
what-
Anyone else have an idea about? Is there a thread you recognize? Is it something way they might be connected? Yeah.
I thought it sounded like "put me in, coach."
Put me in, coach. Yeah, here I am. Okay. Good. Okay. Others? Anybody else? Good. The thread that I saw running through it was encounter. Isaiah's in the temple doing his temple thing as a priest, and he has this encounter with God, this vision, and in the vision, God is lifted up on the throne, and his train. We used to sing this whole song, about his train filled the temple. And there were these creatures, these seraphs that were flying around. And they were all saying, "Holy, holy, holy." And so Isaiah is very much aware that he is in the presence of God. And his immediate reaction is, "I have unclean lips, and I live among people who have unclean lips." And so they, and the seraph then brings a hot coal from the fire that's on the altar and brings it to the lips of Isaiah to sear the lips and and to make them pure. Now remember, this is a vision, okay? Okay. And so in the vision, his lips are seared, and one of the ways of dealing with dealing with things that need to be purified is, of course, heat. You know, and that was sort of a common way to deal with that. And so his lips were seared, and so God, in a sense, took care of his guilt right then. You know. And then Isaiah's response then is to, God, is to be God's spokesperson for over 64 years. When some people believe, some scholars say, for 64 years he was a prophet, and he didn't bring nice messages. He was a prophet. This was like the first part of Isaiah. And the second part of the Isaiah, which most people believe was written by someone else, another Isaiah, another person. The first part of Isaiah is all the word that he had to bring to these people were very condemning. And it was a trying, politically, it was a trying time. And so out of this encounter with God, Isaiah heard his call. And maybe he did say, put me in, coach. Then in the 1 Corinthians passage, there's a lot in that passage, but Paul also recalls his call, his encounter with God, his encounter with the resurrected Christ. And most of you remember that story, probably from the book of Acts, where Paul, who has been a persecutor of Christians. In Acts it says that he held the clothes of those that stoned Stephen, one of the early church leaders, and Stephen was accused of blasphemy and was stoned. And then Paul was on his way to Damascus to persecute or to arrest some Christians, and on the way to Damascus, he encounters this light, and it blinds him, and also there's a voice, and the voice says, Saul, why do you persecute me? And it was the voice of the resurrected Christ, and Paul's life was changed from then on, probably through this encounter. And he became the apostle to the Gentiles, and he wrote a big chunk of the New Testament, and he shaped theology of the church, the early church, and also the church down through the ages. Encounter. That was what I saw in the. But I was thinking, what is an encounter? Anyway, it's when we use it as a verb, it usually has sort of a negative word, this didn't happen this time, but I could say, en route to church this morning, I encountered unusual and heavy traffic. I encountered icy roads, and so sometimes the word encounter, use of the word is usually sort of negative, but the positive, as a noun, encounter means an unexpected or casual meeting with someone. I don't know if any of you have ever done a marriage encounter. It's a weekend retreat for married couples, and they chose it's sponsored by the Catholics, and I'm not even sure they still have them. But the idea is that on this weekend away, you and your spouse will have an encounter with each other. That and you will experience, you will maybe see each other differently. But you will have this, because of the slow down pace and the retreat exercises that are given, you will have opportunity to know each other better. So the thread that caught my eye was encounter. That's all it seems to be in those two stories. Those encounters were sort of mysterious, weren't they? But they sort of, you know, the first one, Sarah swimming, flapping around, and God, you know, and Tom, Sarah's bringing coals to the mouth of Isaiah. That's sort of a mysterious kind of thing. It's sort of, and the other one is also where Paul is sort of struck down by life, and he encounters, you know, this voice. He hears this voice, and sometimes the encounters that we have are, you know, are full of mystery, and mysticism. In the story we read in the Gospel, the Gospel encounter, Simon Peter and his fishing partners, James and John, have been fishing without success. And I don't know why, because I know that Andrew was Simon's brother. I don't know why he missed out on getting mentioned here, you know. And but he may have been there and maybe not. And so they called it, you know, they called it a day, or actually they called it a night. They've been fishing all night, and so it was in the day, beginning maybe the early part of the day. And so they had come ashore. They were washing their nets. Along came Jesus, and there were crowds of people who were wanting things from Jesus. Perhaps they wanted healing. Perhaps they just wanted a word. You know, maybe they wanted to hear him preach and teach. Maybe he'd been preaching and teaching somewhere else, and now he was moving along, and they just kept coming wanting more. We don't have very many details of how Luke's story here, and so when Jesus gets to the lake, then it occurs to Jesus that it would be that if he was going to preach and teach, maybe it would be good to have sort of a pulpit. And so he thought, a boat would be a good pulpit. You know, I can get on in the boat, and we can row out this. We can go out just a little ways, and then I can preach to the people from the boat. And so he commandeers Peter's boat. You know, he asked for it. You know, and I don't know what Peter was thinking. You know, when he was sitting there cleaning his nets, and Jesus comes up with this crowd. My guess is that he knew who Jesus was. That that Jesus had caused quite a stir by teaching with authority and also with the miracles that he'd done, and maybe he sort of knew who Jesus was. And so Jesus asks for the boat, and Peter. So Jesus preaches, and Simon Peter controls the boat. You know, and they're sitting there, and he preaches. We don't know what he preached. You know, what do you think he preached? Don't know. Maybe he did like he did, and maybe he took a passage as he did in his hometown, and that we read about last week, and he expounded on it and said, and identified with the Old Testament passage. Maybe he did that, or maybe he told parables. My guess is those parables that are ended up in the scriptures, and Luke has a great collection of parables. He didn't just say those one time. Anybody that's done it, when Sandy comes to preach, he's probably going to share the best. I'm beginning to get us. We want to get on your dance card. Sandy for another time when we come. So maybe Jesus had already told people about the prodigal son. And maybe he had told people about the Good Samaritan. We don't know. We don't know what he was preaching here on this boat, but he was preaching something, and I'm sure that as Peter was there tending the boat, and he was listening. And so So then after Jesus finishes preaching, then he says, let's go out deeper and throw your net in. And, Peter may have gone through this thing, and, where he said, I'm the fisherman, and we know that we haven't caught fish. But, you are Jesus. And so he did what Jesus said, and started pulling the net in, and there were more fish than he could handle. And so he called his partners, James and John, over and to help. And my guess is that when James and John saw Simon Peter and Jesus move going out in the deep and preparing to throw the nets out, they probably were punching each other with their elbows, saying, "They're not going to catch any fish. We know. We're the fishermen. We know. There's no fish here today. They're not available." But they caught fish. And there are a lot of questions that I have about the story. I drive my wife bonkers when we watch TV. If there's anything that doesn't quite fit, I say, okay, how do they know that? Maybe some of you are like that. Some of you are like my wife that says it doesn't matter. And I used to do this, Barbara, I used to do this more in medical shows, and I say, okay, where's the chaplain? Where's the chaplain in this? And there are a lot of things we don't know about the dynamics, of this story. We don't know. As I said, we don't know whether Peter, already was familiar with Jesus. We don't know if he was at his baptism, for example. Maybe they had been drawn to John the Baptist, and when Jesus was baptized with John the Baptist, maybe Peter, and Andrew, and James and John are all there. We don't know. But this story in Luke of the calling is the calling of Peter, the son of Simon Peter, and so he immediately after the catching of the fish, Peter's reaction was, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." And then Jesus' reaction was, "Do not be afraid." And then he puts before Peter a new purpose. A new purpose. Perhaps the words, "do not be afraid," related to as much to their call to be followers as it did to their astonishment. There has to be unknowns there. There has to be unknowns there and as it indicates they dropped their nets and then they just took off. I wondered about Peter's wife. Maybe that's why she was sick later, or her mother-in-law was sick or something. But I was wondering, I wondered about all the details that they didn't take care of, And my guess is that they did, but that is not the point of the story. The point of the story is that when we encounter Jesus, in this encounter of Jesus gave to this group of guys, gave them a call to something that was of great purpose and meaning. Now, a second question that I have for you is, what have the encounters in your life been like? Have you had traumatic encounters? I've mentioned Marcus Borg a lot. I like Marcus Borg because he asks the same kind of questions I ask. So I've been reading his Convictions is the name of it, Tim. It was that same book. Which is sort of autobiographical. And he talks about conversions being in several stages in life. through the encounters of his life. But one of the stages, one of the things that happened was he had these encounters with God. You know, they were very mystical. He was not familiar with mysticism at all, but he had these mystical experiences where God, and he had like 3 or 4, and when he was 30 years old, and in his 50s he had another one. They were like experiences that he had trouble describing. And in this book he has a little section on mysticism, and which was really interesting because of all the people that I read, Marcus Borg, I never thought of him as being mystical, being mystic. But I was thinking about the encounters, my encounters with God. I usually don't have those kinds of experiences, and I certainly have not had, you know, I certainly have not went into seraphs burning that's not, you know, burning my lips. But what I have had things happen to me. I have had these experiences, and when I walked away, I said, there was God. God was there. I'm seeing something different. There's a purpose that's new to me. And most of those were not things that I saw. Most of those encounters were not encounters that I saw. They sort of occurred out of the blue, you know. And I can remember some of them had to do with major sort of turns in my life. The lifting of consciousness in regard to issues in my life. You know, I can't remember, you know, how much I've shared about my experience with coming out of a deep South background, where racism was a part of the air we breathed. It was just it was institutionalized. And I was at the University of Illinois, and I'd gone with an InterVarsity conference, and there was this was in the real heart of this was at a time when the civil rights push was really strong, and there was conflict and crisis going, and scary kind of things happening all around. And I remember going into this conference there, and it was entitled "Race Relations in the Evangelical Church." I don't see many of those kind of things anymore, I remember in that session, it was like God put his finger on things in my life. And I can remember walking back from that hall to my dormitory, and we were in the middle of a blizzard. It was snowing. I mean, it was just coming down. And I remember, there was a person walking beside me that had been in the conference. And I didn't know who she was. We may have introduced ourselves. But I do remember her walking beside me. And I remember thinking that God had put his finger on something in my life. And it was a turning point for me. And I knew that I could never go back. I could never go back I could never go back figuratively to where I was. And I didn't even want to. I do know that in the encounters, I've also felt a deep inadequacy to carry out the challenge that God had set before me at times. But I felt new purpose and passion for the road ahead. As I encountered challenges and issues and problems, as I took the road ahead and all these things that God called me to, it was not like that it was all smooth sailing either. You know, there were issues and there were problems that occurred, and in dealing with those problems, I had to step forward. Either I could shrink back from them, or I could step forward and try to deal with them with the purpose and the passion was great enough. part of it was that out of that sense of call or encounter, I discovered that God was in the midst of it, and that I wasn't alone. So Isaiah became the bearer of challenges, a bearer of a challenging, harsh message. And Paul became the apostle to the Gentiles and the theological shaper of the early church. And Simon became Peter the rock, the follower of Christ until his own death on the cross in Rome. Thinking about encounters in my life and the life of the church, I'm aware that life is really like a journey. And at times we have to pull off the road and rest. So sometimes that's okay. But the call is always to get back on the road. Sometimes we can move along at our own pace, and sometimes we have to move slower because the traffic is slow. And sometimes we move faster than we thought we could because the traffic is fast, and we have to move fast to get down the road. But movement and purpose is always ahead of us. Always. What about your encounters? Anybody want to tell me one real quick? No? Right, Barbara?
Okay. I remember in seminary whining. I was in a real whining period.
Why?
Whining. I was in church and I was whining to God, complaining to God, and all sorts of things. And I remember in the prayer, I got this very clear. I don't know who you're talking to about, but it's not me. And it was kind of a chiropractic intervention by God to say, I don't know who you're whining about, and that life is my fault. It's like, this is your responsibility. It was a real clarifying. I didn't realize I was being all self-thinking and victim-y. And it was just, I started laughing.
Yeah, I was thinking that it seems to me that in these encounters, it's almost like God holds a mirror up.
Yeah, that's exactly what
It has like,
It made me laugh.
Yeah.
I just started laughing.
and no, it's finished when I did whatever it is. What about any of the rest of you have an encounter that you'd like to share?
Well, I had an encounter with, I don't know, my mom's been dead for Carol Piper for about 5 years. And right after she died, I was up to the cemetery and I saw this yellow butterfly. And I got out of my car, went over to my mom's grave, and here the butterfly kind of flew towards me and stopped. Flew past me and came back. And then just took off.
Yeah.
And that was a sense to be like, oh my gosh, I mean, this is my mom, but God. I mean, it's like, we know you miss her, so the butterfly would fly away and come back and then take off.
What a sweet reminder that was, and a message that was. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
I had a relationship with Laura for maybe 8 years or so in this academy when this happened. And I was probably in my late 30s, starting a relationship with Laura. And I felt really clearly, obviously not audibly, but pretty clearly Lord speaking to me as far as working with youth. And one thing he said to me is, you have to quit smoking.
Was what?
You have to quit smoking.
Oh,
You can't work with you if you're smoking. And at that moment, I just audibly said, Lord, we have to take this away from me because I can't do it.
Yeah.
I didn't want another cigarette.
Oh, wow.
So I don't,
It's
guys.
amazing.
That-
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Anyone else have a experience you'd like to share? David?
My name is Raju. Before I am Hindu, when I read the Bible, that time I not believe. When I read the Bible, in the God they say, if you trust me, go parents will be slap you, your parents will be avoid you. In Bible I read. That time I think, why I believe you, why my parents will be avoid you? I think, but I read Bible. But whatever I read, when I go back home, I tell to my parents, good onwards I want to pray Jesus. I want to believe you. I want to pray. Whatever I read in Bible, as it is same. My father's brother, he slapped me, he kicked me. My grandmother said, I never give my property to leave from my house. I said, okay, I have no problem. I'm carrying my bag, I'm coming out. Until that time, I don't know English, I don't know any other word also. I know nothing, I don't know. My mother's watching me. How do you want to be? I say to my mother one thing. In this world, they have a lot of things. Animals, everything. They know how to work, but they give me food, my brother. I have 2 hands, I have hands. I think God give my son. That time my mother watching, brother. Before, nothing in my mouth. They all are watching me. What happened? After that, spiritual life, after taking baptism, I read Bible. But sure, I'm telling this true. Revelation chapter 1, maybe Paul. When they are saying about Jesus, he said, from back of me, one guy is coming like glory, full of glory, 7 feet high. His eyes will be burning with the fire. His hair will be like full of gold. His legs will be full of gold. As it is, when I read Bible, at the night, I sleep every day morning, I pray 3 o'clock. Every day morning, I wake up, I pray. One day I say, oh my Lord, before I pray, moon, sun, earth, sea, ocean, whatever I see, and my mother parents say, this is our Lord. I pray that stone. This is our God. I pray that. I say, okay Lord,